The morning she told me to stop cooking in my own kitchen, I didn't say a word. I turned off the burner, set down my spatula, and walked to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had slept in for 31 years. In the same house I had painted, repaired, and paid for, and I made a decision. Not an angry one, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't make noise until it's already finished. But I should start from the beginning, because the beginning matters. It always does. My name is Dorothy, and I am 68 years old. I spent 32 years as a registered nurse at a hospital in Savannah, Georgia. I have seen people at their worst and at their best. I have held the hands of strangers in their final moments. I have watched families fracture under pressure, and I have watched them hold together against all odds. I thought, after all of that, I understood people fairly well. I thought I could recognize when something wasn't right. What I didn't understand, what I had to learn the hard way, is that the people who hurt you most are rarely strangers. They are the ones sitting at your table, eating the food you cooked, sleeping under the roof you built. My husband, Raymond, passed 7 years ago. Heart attack. He was 63, and he had never been sick a day in his life. Which is the cruelest kind of irony for a man who watched his diet and walked 2 miles every single morning. After he died, I stayed in our house. People asked if I would downsize, move somewhere smaller, move closer to family. I said no every time. This house was where we had raised our son. It was where Raymond had built the back porch with his own hands one summer, complaining about the heat the entire time but refusing to stop until it was done. It was where I had planted the rose bushes along the front fence that still bloomed every April. I was not going anywhere. My son Marcus lived about 40 minutes away with his wife, Vanessa. They had been married for 6 years. I had tried, from the very beginning, to have a good relationship with her. I brought food when I visited. I remembered her birthday. I asked about her job, her family. Some people require more effort than others, and I was willing to put in the effort for my son's sake. Marcus loved her. That was enough for me, or so I told myself. Things were fine, the way things can be fine on the surface, while something else entirely is happening underneath. Then Marcus lost his job. It wasn't his fault. The company downsized, cut an entire department, and he was one of 40 people who walked out on a Friday afternoon with a box of their things and a handshake from HR. He called me that evening, and I could hear it in his voice, that particular kind of hollowness that comes from having the floor drop out from under you. I told him it would be all right. I believed it. What I didn't anticipate was what came next. 2 weeks later, Vanessa called me. Not Marcus, Vanessa. She had a voice that always sounded like she was explaining something to someone who didn't quite understand, even when she was asking a favor. She said they were having difficulty with their rent. She said it would only be temporary. She said it would mean so much to them if they could stay with me for a little while, just until Marcus found something new. I said yes. They moved in on a Saturday in October. 3 carloads of things, plus a moving truck for the larger furniture. My living room, which had always been arranged the way I liked it, was suddenly different. The couch I had chosen was pushed to one side to make room for a chair Vanessa had brought from their apartment. The side table, where I kept my reading glasses, and my current book, disappeared into a corner. Small things. I told myself they were small things. I want to be honest about something, because I think honesty is the only reason a story like this has any value at all. I did not set rules in the beginning. I should have. I was so relieved that Marcus was under my roof, where I could see him, where I could make sure he was eating and sleeping, and not disappearing into that hollowness I had heard in his voice. I forgot to be clear. I forgot that welcoming someone into your home and surrendering your home are 2 entirely different things. Nobody told me that the line between them could move so gradually. You almost don't notice until you're standing on the wrong side of it. The first few months were manageable. Marcus spent his days applying for jobs and spent his evenings helping around the house. He fixed the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He was, in those early months, my son, the one I recognized. Vanessa was harder to read. She had opinions about everything. About the way I organized the refrigerator. About the television programs I watched in the evenings. About the fact that I liked to go to bed at 9:30 and was, therefore, as she put it, making the house feel like a retirement community. She never said these things aggressively. She said them in that explaining voice, as though she were simply offering information that I had overlooked. I absorbed it. I adjusted. I told myself it was an adjustment period for everyone. By the time spring came, something had shifted. Though I could not have told you exactly when or how. Vanessa had begun to speak about the house as though it were shared property rather than mine. She referred to our kitchen and our backyard. She made decisions about what to plant in the garden, about which cleaning products to buy without asking me. And when I offered a different opinion, there was a look. Not quite contempt. Something more refined than that. Something that said she had already decided, and my input was a courtesy she was extending, not a conversation she intended to have. Marcus didn't see it. Or if he did, he didn't say so. I went to my friend Carol about it. One afternoon when we were sitting on her porch with glasses of sweet tea and the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from 30 years of friendship. I told her what was happening, not dramatically, just the facts. Laid out plainly, Carol looked at me over the rim of her glass and said, "Dorothy, do you hear yourself? That woman is running your house." I had heard myself. That was the problem. I had heard myself, and I had kept adjusting. The thing about allowing small things is that they create an expectation. And expectations, once established, are very difficult to reset without a confrontation. And I had spent a lifetime as a nurse, as a mother, as a wife, as a neighbor and a friend, smoothing things over rather than sharpening them. I was good at peace. I had confused being good at peace with being incapable of anything else. The morning Vanessa told me to stop cooking in my own kitchen was a Tuesday. I had woken up early, the way I always do, and I had started making a pot of grits the way my mother had taught me: low heat, slow stir, a little butter at the end. Vanessa came downstairs in her robe and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said that the smell of savory food in the morning gave her a headache. She said she had mentioned this before. She had not, in fact, mentioned it before. She said it would be better if I could wait until after 9 to use the stove. After 9. I turned off the burner. I set down the spatula. I walked to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I was very still for a long time. I could hear the sounds of the house, Vanessa moving around in the kitchen, the television clicking on in the living room, a car passing outside on the street. Ordinary sounds, a completely ordinary morning. And yet something in me had gone very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with defeat. I picked up my phone and I called my friend Carol. "I think it's time." Carol didn't ask what I meant. She had been waiting for this call. "I know a good attorney," she said. "His name is Gerald Patterson. He handles estate planning. You need to go see him before you do anything else." I made an appointment for that Friday. I want to say something about the weeks between that Tuesday morning and the moment everything changed, because they were not simple weeks. I went about my routine. I cooked after 9 not because I had accepted her rule, but because I was waiting. There is a difference between accommodating someone and strategically choosing your timing. And I had finally understood the difference. I watched Vanessa move through my house with the ease of someone who had already begun to think of it as her own. I listened when she spoke, and I nodded when it was appropriate, and I held, in the back of my mind, the appointment with Gerald Patterson like a small, steady light. Gerald was a quiet man, with an office full of plants and degrees on the wall. He sat across from me and listened without interrupting while I explained the situation. When I finished, he folded his hands on the desk and said, Mrs. Dorothy, you have more options than you realize. He explained what a revocable living trust was. He explained that by placing my home and my assets in a trust, with myself as the trustee and a designated successor, I could protect everything I had spent a lifetime building, not just from outside claims, but from any future complications I might not be anticipating yet. He explained that it would have no effect on my day-to-day life. I would still own my home in every practical sense, but it would be, as he put it, clearly and irrevocably documented. I asked him how long it would take. He said 2 weeks, maybe 3. I said, let's start today. I did not tell Marcus. I did not tell Vanessa. I drove home that afternoon and I sat in my garden by Raymond's rose bushes and I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Not quite relief, more like the feeling of standing on solid ground after a long time of not being sure what was beneath your feet. The call came on a Thursday evening in late June. I was reading in my bedroom, the door closed, which I had begun doing more and more when I heard raised voices downstairs, not shouting, but that sharpened quality that voices get when something that has been kept inside is finally pushing its way out. I put down my book. I sat and I listened. I could hear Vanessa clearly. She was saying that they needed stability. She was saying that this arrangement could not go on indefinitely with no security for the future. She was saying that at her age, she was 34, she needed to be thinking about her financial footing, about what came next, about what was reasonable to expect. Then I heard Marcus say, in a voice I had not heard from him since he was a teenager trying to get out of something, Vanessa, maybe we should wait and— I've already waited, she said. I'm going to talk to her tonight. I set my book on the nightstand. I straightened my reading glasses. I waited. There was a knock at my bedroom door. Vanessa opened it before I answered, which was itself something. And she came in and sat on the chair in the corner, Raymond's chair, the one he used to sit in to take off his shoes with the ease of someone who did not consider this a notable act. She said she wanted to have an honest conversation. I said I was listening. She talked for a while. About financial planning. About equity. About how, realistically, this arrangement had been working well and she didn't see why it couldn't continue to work well in a more formal capacity. About how there were certain tax advantages to transferring property within a family while everyone was still healthy and present to manage it. About how she had been doing research and she understood the process was straightforward. She was, I will give her this, well prepared. When she finished, she looked at me with the expression she always used, patient, slightly expectant, as though the reasonable response was obvious, and she was simply waiting for me to arrive at it. She said she thought it would be best if I transferred the house into joint ownership. She said she had already spoken with a notary she knew. She said we could have the paperwork ready by the end of the month. I looked at her for a moment. Just looked at her. Then I said, I'll need to speak with my attorney first. Something moved across her face, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. Your attorney? Yes, I said. Gerald Patterson. I've been working with him for the past few weeks on some estate matters. I'll call him tomorrow and we can go from there. She said that seemed overly complicated for what was really a simple family matter. I said, most things worth doing correctly are a little complicated. She left my room. I could hear her and Marcus talking downstairs, the low, urgent murmur of it. I turned off my bedside lamp and lay back on my pillow in the dark. And I felt not triumphant, not relieved, not sad. I felt clear, the way the air feels after a long rain, when everything unnecessary has been washed away. Marcus came to me the next morning. He knocked and waited for me to answer, which I noticed. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and he looked, for a moment, like the boy he had been at 14, trying to navigate something he didn't fully understand. He said Vanessa had told him about their conversation. I said yes. He said he didn't know she was going to do that. He said he wanted me to know he hadn't asked her to. I looked at my son. I looked at the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 10 years ago, and the way he held his shoulders like a man who had been carrying weight he wasn't sure how to put down. I thought about Raymond, about the thousands of mornings we had sat at this same table before Marcus was awake, drinking coffee and talking about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. I said, "Marcus, when did you stop being the person who looks out for the people he loves?" He was quiet for a long time. I said, "I'm not asking to hurt you. I'm asking because I genuinely need to understand." He put down his coffee mug. He stared at the table. And then, in a voice that was very low and very careful, he said, "I didn't realize how far it had gone. I think I told myself it was easier to not see it." I said, "I know. I did the same thing for a while." We sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "I had a meeting with an estate attorney 3 weeks ago. I've put the house and my assets in a living trust. Everything is documented, everything is protected, and I am the sole trustee." I said it plainly, not as a threat, not as a victory announcement, just as a fact. This house will never be in anyone else's name as long as I am alive, and after I am gone, it will go where I decide it goes. That is not a conversation I am willing to have with Vanessa or with anyone else. It's already decided. Marcus was very still. I said, "That is not a punishment. It is simply the truth of the situation that should have always been clear." He nodded, slowly. Something in his face shifted. Something I can only describe as a door closing on a room that had been causing a draft. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. The way I had when he was small and had fallen and needed a moment before he could stand back up again. I said, "I know you are." What happened over the following weeks was not dramatic. That's the thing about quiet decisions, they don't require dramatic endings. Vanessa did not make a scene. She didn't rage or threaten or dissolve into apology. She became, instead, very still in the way that people become still when they understand that the play they had been running is finished and there is no version of it left to try. She told Marcus that she wanted to look for their own apartment. He came to me and said she wanted to move out by the end of August. I said, "All right." I helped Marcus pack some of his things one afternoon, the way I had helped him pack for his first apartment at 22, and I was struck by how much of what he carried with him, the small things, the books and the photographs, and the worn-down objects of a life in progress, were things I recognized. Things that had started here. I put a box of his grandmother's dishes in the trunk of his car, and I said nothing about them leaving, only that they had always been meant for him. The last morning, Vanessa and I stood briefly in the kitchen while Marcus carried the final boxes to the car. She was precise about it, keys on the counter, a quick summary of what she'd cleaned. A sentence about having my cable login returned to me. She was efficient and she was civil, and when she looked at me it was with a kind of rearranged expression, as though she had done some internal reordering and arrived at something close to neutral. She said, "I hope things go well for you, Dorothy." I said, "And for you," and I meant it. I truly did. I am old enough to understand that people are complicated and that the things that make someone behave badly are rarely simple. I was not glad she had been in my home. I was not glad for the months of erosion and the mornings of gritted teeth and the long sleepless stretches of 2 a.m. when I had lain in this house that was mine and felt, somehow, like a guest in it. But I was not glad to watch her go in defeat, either. What I felt was something more honest and less neat than either of those things. After their car pulled out of the driveway, I went inside. I made a pot of grits. Low heat, slow stir, a little butter at the end, the way my mother had taught me. I turned on the television in the living room and set the volume exactly where I liked it. I sat in my chair, the one by the window, the one that is mine, and I ate my breakfast with the easy, particular pleasure of a thing done in peace. The rose bushes along the front fence were blooming. Raymond had always said they bloomed for whoever needed them most, which was something he made up entirely, but said with such confidence that I had half believed it for 30 years. I believed it that morning. I want to say something to whoever is listening to this, and I mean this not as advice, because I am not in the business of telling anyone what to do with their own life, but as something I wish I had understood sooner. There is a kind of love that expresses itself through endless accommodation, and for a long time I confused it with virtue. I thought that absorbing the small indignities, adjusting, bending, giving way, I thought that was generosity. I thought that was what good mothers and good women did. What I know now is that accommodation without limit is not generosity. It is disappearance. You disappear, a little at a time, and no one around you necessarily notices because you are still present and still functional and still managing everything that needs managing. But you are not fully there. And one day you sit on the edge of your bed in a house that has your name on the deed and you feel, for one terrible, clear moment, like a stranger in your own life. That feeling that was my teacher. Not Vanessa, not the situation, not any external thing. That moment of sitting on the edge of my bed and going very quiet, that was the thing that gave me back to myself. I don't know where Marcus and Vanessa are now in their lives together. I know that he calls me every Sunday morning. I know that the conversations have changed. There is something easier in them. Something that was not there before. He asks about the garden and about Carol and about whether I have been sleeping well. He tells me about his new job and about the apartment and about the small, ordinary details that make up a life. There was a Sunday a few months back when he said, unprompted, "I was thinking about Dad today, about the way he used to burn the pancakes and pretend he hadn't." And we both laughed, and then we were both quiet for a moment, and it was the right kind of quiet. That is what I have. This house, this garden, these Sunday mornings, the volume on the television, exactly where I like it. Some people, when they hear a story like this, want to know about the confrontation. They want the moment of full reckoning, the raised voices, the accounting of every wrong. I understand that impulse. I have felt it myself. But I have learned that the most significant moments in a life are often the quiet ones, the decision made alone in a room, the phone call to an attorney, the hand placed on a kitchen counter when something is finished. I did not need to raise my voice to take back what was mine. I only needed to be clear. I had spent years being gentle. I had not yet learned that you can be gentle and firm at the same time, the way a very old tree is both bending in the wind but rooted too deep to move. I know that now. Raymond used to say that the best view in Savannah was from our back porch on a clear morning before the heat came in. He built that porch himself, and he was proud of it, even though the railing on the left side was never quite level and drove him quietly crazy for the rest of his life. I sit out there some mornings before it gets warm with my coffee, and I look at the yard and the rose bushes and the crepe myrtle that has gotten almost too large and that I trim back every fall, and that comes back fuller every spring. I am here. This is mine. I earned it not through conflict, not through power, but through simply deciding, at 68 years old, to stop making myself smaller than the life I had built. You are allowed to take up the space that belongs to you. You are allowed to hold what you have earned. And when someone asks you to disappear quietly from your own living room, you do not have to shout. You do not have to fight. You only have to know who you are and make one phone call. The rest will follow.